So you may have seen some comments online about how Adrien Brody won 2 Oscars for playing the same role. For some reason, people are under the impression that The Pianist and The Brutalist are something alike. So let's talk about it. So The Pianist was released in 2002. I would call it a biographical and historical drama. It was based on the memoir by Władysław Szpilman, who was a famous composer and pianist in Poland. The story tells of his experiences during World War II, specifically from 1939 to 1945. He wrote his memoir in 1947, so the memories were still pretty fresh. Our story begins with Szpilman playing piano on the radio, as he often did, and the station is bombed. There's a transition from the calm piano playing to an explosion, and it's quite well done. It lets you know, life just blew up. It's a really good visual. Plus, I mean, it really did happen, but it's also a very good visual as far as the film goes. So the story follows Szpilman's life as things get progressively worse for him and his family. So Szpilman is helped out here and there by people who know him or know of him. It gets to a point, though, where he is all alone. So it's ultimately an uplifting story, I would say, but it's a hard watch. You will probably shed some tears if you're the type who cries. I know I am. Now, The Brutalist was released in 2024, and it is a fictional story about a Hungarian architect who moves to the United States, Pennsylvania specifically, after World War II, and starts his life over. He was a successful architect in Europe, but when he comes to America, he has to work in his cousin's furniture store. This character named Harrison Van Buren, played by Guy Pearce, presents him with the opportunity to build a community center in honor of his late mother. And it's just this sprawling building. And it's going to take up, a whole hillside. And people think they're both crazy, for undertaking this. So a lot of the film is spent on the ins and outs of that building process. Meanwhile, we see Laszlo's struggles with addiction and with separation from his family, and his struggles to fit in a new culture, and the judgments he comes across because of his accent or just because he's an immigrant in general. I think ultimately the message of The Brutalist is to be careful what you wish for, because you have this grand idea of what something's going to be like, and then it doesn't quite live up to those expectations. I would say what the two films do have in common is the theme of survival. For Szpilman in The Pianist, it's more literal, of course, of physical survival. With Laszlo Toth in The Brutalist, it's more about the survival of his spirit and his will and his individuality. So The Pianist is, I would say, a smaller story. It takes, a big event and focuses it on one man's life and one man's survival. And, it makes it more personal for the viewer, sometimes too much so. It is heartbreaking at times because you feel like you're a part of it. The film is shot very intimately. When he's in hiding, it's darker, and it's just, you feel like you're there with him, and it's a very emotional journey. The Brutalist, on the other hand, is very big, quite literally, because it was filmed in VistaVision, which hasn't really been used in an American film since 1961 or something like that. And it's just this huge scope. It's like Gone with the Wind or Lawrence of Arabia, that kind of grandeur and spectacle. So a lot of people have asked me, well, which one do you prefer? And as I said, they're so different that it's kind of hard to say that. There are things I like about each one. As far as Adrien's performances go, with The Pianist, he was the only person on screen a lot, and he had to convey a lot just with his physicality, with his facial expressions. You know, there were scenes where there was no dialogue because his character had to keep quiet to stay safe. With The Brutalist, everything is more grandiose, you know, and he has a lot more to do, a lot more to say, for sure. So I don't know. I mean, both performances are great, but in totally different ways. That's why it's so weird to me when people say, oh, we won an Oscar for doing the same thing twice. And no, not at all. If you've seen both films, you already know what I mean. Those performances are nothing alike. So basically what I'm saying is he deserved both of those Oscars. And I think in the end, I will end up liking The Pianist more. I think a lot of that is a nostalgia factor because it's the first film of his I ever saw. So I'm kind of attached to it, you know. And it's just a quieter story, a more condensed story. So my favorite scene in The Pianist is one that always makes me cry, and saying it now will probably also. So my favorite scene in The Pianist is where Vladek and his family are being ushered to the trains, and Vladek says to his sister Helena,
"It's a funny time to say this, but
What?
I wish I knew you better."
Thank you.
and it really hits you that this is a true story, and that is the last conversation they ever have. So my favorite scene in The Brutalist is much lighter than that. It is when Laszlo confronts Jim Simpson, who's like a local, I think he's also an architect or contractor, something like that. He's basically brought onto the project to cut costs, and he undermines Laszlo at every turn. And Laszlo finally snaps and says, "Everything that is ugly, cruel, stupid,
but most importantly, ugly, everything is your fault."
And then he has this slight grin and nod, like he's standing by what he just said, and he is not sorry. Jim is basically going to physically fight him, and Guy Pearce's character Harrison comes up to break them up, and he says to Laszlo, "It's gonna be all right, I trust you." And Laszlo eventually smiles and he says, "I'm so sorry that happened, but he's an idiot though." It's such a moment of levity, you know, in an otherwise kind of heavy story. So that's my favorite for sure. Both The Pianist and The Brutalist did pretty well at the Academy Awards. The Pianist was nominated for 7 categories, which were cinematography, costume design, editing, Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Actor, and Best Director, and it won the latter 3. The Brutalist was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, including Original Screenplay, Editing, Best Supporting Actor for Guy Pearce, Best Supporting Actress for Felicity Jones, Production Design, Best Picture, Best Director, Score, Cinematography, and Best Actor. And again, it won the latter 3. And for the part you really wanted to know, Adrien's speech when he won for The Pianist was 4 minutes and 3 seconds long. When he won for The Brutalist, his speech was 5 minutes and 37 seconds long. So in conclusion, I hope this video helps you see that The Pianist and The Brutalist are vastly different films, and Adrien gave vastly different performances in them. So the only thing that Władysław Szpilman and Laszlo Toth have in common is that they were played by Adrien Brody, and they were both Holocaust survivors. And people say that as if survivors are a monolith. And it doesn't make sense to me. It's like saying, oh, well, Gandalf from Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter are the same character because they're both wizards. I mean, you know, I just, I don't know. I mean, I have to keep in mind that a lot of people are just being trolls and it's rage bait, you know, and I'm not taking the bait. So I made this whole video to explain the differences instead.